Can you imagine this being your first service to lead? We're so proud of you, Erin. Really proud of you. Thank you so much. Not a easy first service, right? So thank you, thank you. So some of you have heard me speak multiple times this week, and some of you haven't heard me speak at all on this topic. So I'm going to just jump right in. Part of me feels like what we have to do is ask people to stand up and move around. Who thinks we should, is the Israeli Defense Forces, should flatten Gaza to smithereens? Should I think all sit in a section? And who thinks that that's not going to be the solution and we shouldn't do that? Sit in another section. Of course, I think many of us feel all of those things, and that's what's so complicated. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about where we are, where the Parsha, I hope, gives us some insight. But most of all, I want to say, I don't have any easy answers. As Rabbi Noah Satat said on her that conversation we had, which was 1 o'clock in the morning for her, there's no simple way through this morass. There's no simple way through this morass. We've already had somebody resign from the synagogue this week because they feel like I'm not pro-Israel enough. And we have somebody on the verge of resigning from the synagogue because they feel like I'm not pro-Palestinian enough. Somebody who is, I've had it all this week. So here I am. All I can do is humbly offer you my best thinking at this moment, in this particular time, with all of you. In this week's Parsha, we read about the creation of the first days of the world. And what's one of the earliest things that, of course, we read about is tohu vavohu, that there was complete chaos and darkness in this first day of creation. And how many of us have felt that is the description of what this week has been like. There are those among us who are Israelis and have very close connections, whose families and friends are deeply affected, who have been killed or wounded or taken hostage. There are those among us, and I'm speaking about us as a community, who have been fighting for justice and peace for Palestinians for decades and are torn up by this position that we find ourselves in. There are those who woke up last Saturday, or as the news has emerged, depending how close you were to the Israeli news and the Hebrew press started coming out very early with the descriptions of the atrocities, and they're only now really seeping into the American press, if at all. The horror and the nightmare, I think, somewhat is dependent on how close you are to the descriptions of what the actual attack, this terror attack, was like. And I see that among people. If you use words like infiltration, attack, war, it's so abstract, and it sounds like it's another Gaza-Israel conflict, and oy gewalt, a pox on all their houses. Do you know what I mean? It's like if you use those words. But if you see a video of a young woman naked in the back of a pickup truck with Hamas terrorists standing on top of her, shooting their AK-47s into the air and saying, Allahu Akbar, God is great, and slowing the pickup truck down so that bystanders can spit on her body in the bottom of the truck, you have a little different reaction. And I'm afraid that many in America have not seen those images. So what are the numbers? Last week when I spoke at Simchat Torah services on Saturday night, for those who were here or online, I said at that time there were 250 deaths that we knew of Saturday night, and of course that number was way too small. I said it was kind of luck that the Hamas terrorists found this music festival, and now we think it might have actually been deliberate. 260 young people, mostly in their 20s and late teens, 260 young people murdered as these terrorists shot them as they ran through the fields. We now think the total is somewhere around 1,200. And when I say somewhere around 1,200, it's not clear that they have found all the bodies yet. Some of the buildings were so badly burned with people inside them that we don't actually know the numbers of people that were killed. We don't yet have a complete list of the people who were killed, and we don't have a complete list of those who were taken hostage. So there's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot of trauma. The images absolutely evoke the Holocaust. To see not soldiers fighting, and let's remember the Yom Kippur War, as horrific it was, and by the way, Golda Meir is not popular in Israel at all because of that war, unlike Americans who seem to love Golda Meir. Israelis do not. She failed, and her government failed miserably. The deaths, and there were over 2,000 Israelis killed in the Yom Kippur War, and it's horrific. They were mostly soldiers fighting on a front that was away from most of the civilian homes of most Israelis. We sing on Yom Kippur the Unatana Tokef to the setting that Yair Rosenblum set for the kibbutz of Beit HaShita, which lost 11 young men who were soldiers, and they died in that battle. The Moshav that CBST goes to on every single adult trip to Israel, Netiv HaAsara, which is on the border of Gaza, and we visited it most recently, I think, on the 2018 trip and met with many people there. Who was on that trip? You remember going to that Moshav, right? What? No, that was the 18 trip we couldn't go, but was it the trip before? Which trip did we go to? 2010. We went to Netiv HaAsara. Last week, Yael Weiss read the names that we then knew, the 15 people who have died. We now think it's 27. We don't know exactly because the entire kibbutz, Moshav, has been destroyed. And in 2018, we met with Vivian Silver, the wonderful peace activist who is one of the leaders of the organization, many organizations of Palestinian and Israeli struggles for peace. Nashim Osot Shalom, Women Wage Peace, which is a Palestinian and Israeli Jewish women's organization. And she lived on a kibbutz called Be'eri, which we couldn't go to because even at that time there was some conflict on the border. So she came to meet us at a Bedouin women's collective. She is missing since 11 o'clock last Saturday morning, and we assume she was taken hostage in Gaza. 170 so far Israeli soldiers have been killed. And the atrocities as they emerge from the details given by the survivors are breathtakingly horrific. And again, the closer you are to the Israeli media, the more you get the actual descriptions. Israeli society is in total traumatic shock. It is a tiny country. Everybody knows somebody who was killed, wounded, or taken as a hostage. People are saying it's Israel's 9/11, and to the degree that it was such a shock, that perhaps is right. But the numbers, if there were the equivalent numbers killed in the United States as were killed last Saturday in one day, it would be 40,000 Americans, based on the population. 40,000 Americans. In some ways, it's hard to come up with words to even find a way to respond. And I know from talking to so many of you, there's such a sense of sadness, of grief, of trauma, of fear. What will this mean for the future? And then, of course, the issue is how to even respond and what to do next. And I would love, as I said last week, to say, we are in a Shiva period. We are in a mourning period. This is not the moment to come up with a solution We know from grief and trauma that those are not good places to solve problems. Grief and trauma rarely in our personal lives allow us to make decisions that will long-term be healthy. So there is absolutely this response of we should flatten Gaza, destroy Hamas by completely wiping out everybody who lives in Gaza. And on some level, when you watch or you look at those videos or hear the stories, it's hard on some level not to have that impulse. And there's a part of, I think, many of us, I won't speak for you, there's a part of me that understands that really deeply. Let's just wipe out Gaza because that'll wipe out Hamas. Well, here's the problem with that. There are two levels of problems with that response. One is philosophical, and the other is practical. I'm going to talk about the practical level first. Let me say this really clearly. Every single Palestinian child who is killed will create 1,000 terrorists. The terrorists who committed these crimes knew they were going to die, hoped they were going to die, and assumed they would not live. But they knew that if Israel were to do a ground incursion and even start bombing Gaza out of that impulse for revenge, they don't have to worry because there will be new terrorists created with every single child's death. Let me also say something which is not popular among my friends on the left. Hamas absolutely puts its weapons in hospitals, absolutely shoots off from schools. Absolutely true. So there's the practical. It will not work. Israel has been in control of Gaza Strip since Hamas took over. And guess what? Have we been able to get rid of Hamas? I say we. Has Israel been able to get rid of Hamas? Hamas has only gotten stronger and stronger and stronger. It's a little bit like going to a doctor with a really terrible disease. Until you accurately diagnose the disease, it's impossible to prescribe the medicine that's going to solve the sickness. And we're in that problem right now. Which way will it go? After 9/11, we had these choices as a country. The world was rallying around the United States. The United States had enormous support from amazing coalitions around the world to unite and actively go after the targeted terrorists that were threatening us. But there was such a need for vengeful acts against Afghanistan and Iraq and Afghanistan. And look at those countries today. Have we solved the problem of this terrorism at all? In fact, we have created the foundation for the future. Now, I can't now tell the whole history of Hamas. I am going to be teaching a class, along with Rabbi James, about the contemporary conflict in Lehr House. But let me say this. We have to understand Hamas did not come out of nowhere. It's not like one day Islam woke up and decided to hate Jews. It's not actually the history of Islam and Judaism. So we have to ask ourselves very difficult questions, which is, what is Hamas? Is it just all Palestinians who live in Gaza? Then we have to ask ourselves, what is Gaza? And then we have to ask ourselves, how did Hamas get so much power in Gaza? And how do we separate out Palestinians from Hamas? Are these comfortable questions? Absolutely not. It would be much easier to say, let's just bomb them until Hamas doesn't exist. There is no such thing. Every single child that is killed in Gaza will create 1,000 terrorists. Of that, we are totally sure. That's the practical argument. The philosophical one is that if we as a people are to survive, we have to survive with what sense of what our values are. There are plenty of people who want us to become Pharaoh. There are plenty of ways that we as a people have behaved like Pharaoh. There are plenty of ways that our hearts have been really hardened to what the realities are. America wants a good guy and a bad guy. I am disgusted with the American left. And by the way, I'm on the American left. I am disgusted with my community of American left whose need to see a good guy and a bad guy have painted this situation as, how shall I say, stupidly as the far right. Looking for a good guy and a bad guy. And for the left in America, the Palestinians are the only good guys and the Israelis are the bad guys. Let me tell you who I learned from. And that is the Israeli and Palestinian human rights organizations made up of Jews and Palestinians who do not talk in the language of the American left about what's going on. In the Israeli human rights community, which is Palestinians and Jews together, guess what? Completely different level of discourse. Because they understand there is only one future for that land, and that future has to be a shared society. 1 state, 2 states, 3 states. They don't care what the political formation is going to be, but they understand there has to be a shared society. Neither people are leaving that land. The last time I was in Netiva Asara with Randy in 2014 or 15, we met with Ronnie Kedar, who is a very famous peace activist in Israel, and I think I've mentioned her to some people here. During the 2014 Gaza war, she was in her miklat, her bomb shelter underneath her house in Netiva Asara. She could hear the Israeli bombs, planes going into Gaza. She could hear the rockets coming from Gaza into the Moshav. She was texting with her friends in Gaza because she knows them as human beings who are stuck in a really horrific hell of a situation. And I said to her, so Ronnie, what's the answer? She said, Americans always want that. What's the answer? Americans want a very quick, so what's the solution? What's the solution? Guess what? It's really messy and it's really complicated, but she said to Randy and to me, she said, it's just like your folk singer, that American folk singer says, this land is your land, this land is my land, this land was made for you and me. She said the whole Gaza region should be a region of great economic flourishing. She remembers when there wasn't a border the way there is now, and agricultural workers from Gaza worked the fields of Netiva Asara every single day, where she went shopping in the northern part of Gaza every single week. Her children had friends in Gaza, and they went back and forth. So what happened? I can't do the entire history now, but know this. When Ariel Sharon did the unilateral withdrawal from Gaza, he did it quite deliberately, and then he went into a coma where he couldn't provide any leadership. But he did it quite deliberately without working with the Palestinian Authority. Why did he do that? He didn't want the Palestinian Authority, who were advocating diplomatic solutions to the problem, to be powerful. So he pulled out, and there was a unity government between Gaza and the West Bank. But guess what? It was a corrupt government. And guess what Hamas was doing as the alternative government? They were providing food for poor children. They were taking care of pregnant women. They were creating clinics, medical clinics where there were none. And they said to the people of Gaza, for the only election that they could run in then, look, the Palestinians who wanted to negotiate got you nothing. The way we got the Israelis out of the Gaza Strip was violence. And they won that election. Those two things made it possible for Hamas to win. And then Hamas eliminated all elections. There hasn't been an election since, and they killed or imprisoned every single one of their political opponents, from the Fatah party, which was the alternate party. And guess what? Who thought this was a good thing to make sure that Hamas existed in Gaza? Members of the Israeli political right wing, who did not want to see a two-state solution, understood that the Palestinian society, which is largely secular, the PLO and the Palestinian Authority could be undermined by an Islamist militant party. There is a way that right-wing and extremist Muslim terrorists were serving each other. And in fact, under 20 years of Bibi Netanyahu's government, he allowed Qatar to keep funneling and funding Hamas to keep them alive and strong, because as long as the Palestinian Authority was weak in the West Bank, and Hamas was this evil, and they are evil, there is no question about it, power on the west, in Gaza, guess what happens? How does that work when two of the same are fighting each other? They can't unite, and there is no possibility for a two-state solution. It destroyed the possibility of the two-state solution serving the most venal of some of the Israeli society vision. And then, when Hamas won in that election, and they are terrorists, and their charter does call for the destruction of Israel, and they would kill every single one of us in this room if they had access. By the way, they would kill every single gay person in New York City if they had access. They would kill every single progressive Muslim if they had access. This is not a political party. This is a terrorist organization. And once they were in power, the Israeli government said, we will not negotiate with them, we will not interact them, we are going to build walls and keep them inside Gaza. And that's when the walls went up, and that's when Hamas was left alone with 2 million Palestinians in an open-air prison. It's a complicated history. So since this happened, by the way, it's not that long ago, 16 years it's happened, the Palestinians inside of Gaza have been victims of Hamas as well, and people say, well, why don't they rise up against, why don't the Russians rise up against Putin? Where's the North Koreans with, let's be real about what the world of political authoritarian dictatorship looks like. But every single child who dies makes every normal Gazan sympathetic to the fight against Israel. Where do I learn from? Who do I understand how to appreciate the world? Again, it's from the human rights community inside of Israel. This human rights community has been pushing over and over and over again to how to destroy Hamas, remove the need for Hamas. Create a society in which those people don't need Hamas. Understand that human rights, if they're advocated for by Israeli Jews, will transform, hopefully, the region. It shouldn't be so hard. As Jerry Nadler tweeted, I like this tweet of his. How hard is this? Stand with the Israeli people. Condemn Hamas terror attack. Demand release of hostages, express concern for innocent Palestinian lives in Gaza. How hard can that be? I know the instinct which tells us we should just wipe out Gaza. Let's just wipe it out. Guess what? That will not work as much as that responds to our impulse to have some kind of military power. You don't think Hamas hasn't booby-trapped every single building in Gaza? There will be thousands of deaths of Israeli soldiers. Thousands. There will be tens of thousands of deaths of Gazans. And terror will be given another generation of a life. There is no easy answer here. Anyone who calls for the genocide of Palestinians does not express the Judaism I believe in. Anybody who calls for the flattening of Gaza, we are in grief, we are in trauma. And I understand the impulse to kick back, to push back, to really have an impact. we have to say there's another way. The only way to respond to the crazy militant Islamic terror, which, by the way, is being empowered around the world, is to work with the moderate, with the sane world that is the majority of the Muslim world. But as long as we take positions which push the moderate, mainstream Muslim world to a position where they have to respond to the deaths of children, we will not find a way out of this. And we will be here for another generation. By the way, the weapons that are being found as the Israelis are doing the work in the south, guess what language is found on these weapons? Just guess. Russian. Who has an investment in making sure that all the money to Ukraine disappears? Now, I don't have any, I'm not an expert in all the policy stuff. The methods that we see, the butchery that we see, matches the Wagner Group in the Ukraine. In Ukraine. Sorry about that, Ukraine. And in Africa. Who do those methods look the most like? Hamas did not do this alone by any means, not in terms of money and not in terms of training. I don't know if that's true or not. So, let's diagnose the sickness. Let's make sure we're making connections and contacts with people who share our values. And let me tell you, there are many, many Palestinians who share our values. I have to say I'm profoundly disappointed here in New York. I have not seen that from my colleagues here in New York. I have not seen that on the left here in New York, but I have seen it inside of Israel. And that is the only thing that gives me this tiny little glimmer. Tohu vavohu, this total destruction, this total complete collapse of the world is the way the world starts. But we're also told on that first day, the Or HaGanuz, remember I taught you about the Or HaGanuz? The hidden light is created, the primordial light. Not the light of the moon and the sun, which come days later in structure, but there's a mysterious light that's created, a holy light that's called hidden light. I need to believe that that hidden light is there all the time looking for us, especially in these moments of such profound, bleak darkness. Let us continue to mourn, to be outraged, to be shocked, let the trauma in, and let our hearts not be hardened so that we don't become like them, whatever that them is. Let us remember that if there is going to be a light in the world, it's not coming from anybody else. For this we were put on this planet. I know that these images look exactly like the Holocaust, and I know that these Hamas terrorists are functioning with a hatred to Jews, to LGBT people, to moderate Muslims in a way that would kill all of us. But that doesn't mean all Muslims are like that. It doesn't mean all Palestinians are like that. And they need us to join in partnership to defeat these elements in the world. I can't say it's going to be easy, and I can't say that this perspective will have dominance. But I believe that God has put us on this earth for a reason, and we must honor those who have been killed viciously. We must fight for those who are still hostage. We must take care of the wounded with love and support. And I'd like to ask everybody to stand. I'm going to read 10 names of those who have died so we don't become inured to it or immune to of the 12, maybe 1,300 deaths. These are 10 Some are Jewish, some are Palestinian, some are Bedouin. And then immediately afterwards, I ask everyone to sit, and Yael Weiss, our beloved CBST member and concert pianist, is going to play a piece tonight in memory of all those who have died. And Yael is from a kibbutz, and her family is a founder of one of the kibbutzim very close to the Gaza border. Rotem Newman, 22 years old. Chana Ben Artzi, 69 years old. Yevgeny Gillespie, 34 years old, a firefighter. Awad Drashah, 23, a paramedic. Aharon Haimov, 25. Lior Levy, 19. Yazon Zakaria Abu Jama, 5 years old. Dalia Abu Madian, 30 years old. Aviva Herzroni, 69 years old, medic. And Tamar and Yehonatan Kedem, along with their 3 children, Arbel, Shachar, and Omar, all under the age of 10. May their memories bless us, and may we bless their memories every day. Please be seated.